Is the crowd wiser than the expert? Or is that just a dangerous myth? What happens when one person's competence towers so high above everyone else's that they seem born to rule? Should they be obeyed like a natural king or feared like a tyrant? And here's a 21st century twist. If Aristotle says a single supremely virtuous ruler could be the ideal, does that mean a future superintelligent AI should rule us? Or is that the fastest road to digital tyranny? Hello, everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, please consider liking and subscribing. In this series, I'm working through Aristotle's Politics, combining a summary of each section with my own commentary and modern parallels. If you haven't seen the earlier episodes, I recommend checking them out for full context. But don't worry, each video stands on its own and can be watched independently. Quick recap from the last time. We explored Aristotle's typology of regimes, where the justice of a regime depends on the purpose its rulers serve. Based on both purpose and number of people involved in ruling, Aristotle identified six main forms: three just and three corrupt. Today we stay in Book 3, but our focus shifts toward one of Aristotle's most intriguing ideas: monarchy, or what he calls natural kingship, the rule of one supremely virtuous individual. Aristotle asks, should the many rule or the few? Aristotle's argument for and against the majority making decisions, participating in deliberation and judgment. So supporters of democracy say that the majority, by combining their partial virtues, even though individually they may not be 100% complete virtuous individuals, given that people are different, they can make better judgments than the few, even if no individual is outstanding. So this is what the supporters of majority rule are saying in his time, in Aristotle's time. They say that people's flaws can cancel each other out, so their strengths can add up. He compares it to the poetry or music. One person might enjoy a single part, but the group appreciates the whole. Popular culture is like this. So books, movies, video games across every genre exist because they are accessible to everyone. There are many different forms. In the past, much of this would have been reserved for elites. So this is a very modern phenomenon that we are seeing in the modern world, that a lot of people can spend a very small amount of money to buy books, video games, music, and everything. So by bringing together all things like art, beauty, talent, then there will be a competition, and most beautiful, most excellent, most competent things will be admired the most by the group. So that's the argument that Aristotle is testing here. The, the point is that when many different talents and perspectives come together, so excellence is more likely to emerge. Think of it as a marketplace of ideas where free ideas, including forms of arts, can compete. This also implies more optimistic view of human nature. Okay, all good so far. There is not much criticism coming from Aristotle regarding that. Okay, but how about ruling? Should we give every free citizen the right to rule? Aristotle warns that not everyone should have direct control over the highest offices. But there is a dilemma here when you talk about giving people choice to take part in deliberation and judgment regarding offices. If we give everyone a fair share to take part in the greatest offices, that would be risky. Imagine everyone, regardless of their virtue, regardless of their competence, regardless of their education, they all have the access to everything, as would have been advocated by democracies in ancient Greece, not the modern democracies. So remember what we discussed in the previous episode, where democracies of ancient Greece, proponents would say that, okay, just because we are equal in one variable, being free citizen, we should be free in everything else. taking one principle and stretching it too far. So that's what Aristotle criticizes here, that saying that's risky, that's taken recklessly. But the other way around is also risky. If we deprive them altogether, that creates friction in societies, resentment in societies. So what's the compromise here, according to Aristotle? Give the people a share in deliberation and judgment. For example, electing leaders, serving in juries, participating in polls, without entrusting them with specialized execution. That's reserved for people who understands ruling, governance, and they are selected very carefully based on education and everything. So allowing everyone to take part in deliberation and judgment in some degrees seems to be the best alternative, according to Aristotle, like choosing and auditing rulers, but not ruling alone. Here's the problem, Aristotle says. Only doctors can judge doctors. Only experts can judge experts. They can truly assess the other experts. And this is the case for every other art, says Aristotle. To judge something, you need to be good at it. The same might be held true in case of choosing officials as well. So if we follow this logic, then majority of people shouldn't be given a choice to also even participate in elections, selecting people. And even that would not be reserved if we follow this logic. But then again, Aristotle is not claiming that should be the case, but he is testing it. But then Aristotle admits some arts can be judged by non-experts. For example, a house builder knows structure, but the resident, the person that lives in the house, knows comfort. The cook knows recipes, but the diner, the person that eats that food, knows the taste. The people may not run the art of governance, but they can recognize when it is done well, when the governance is done well. So that in that case, it doesn't apply here. They can take part in deliberation, judgment, choosing, because you don't have to be expert in every single art to understand, to have some ideas, to have some judgments regarding that. So in most cases, it happens that in practice, people can recognize when governance is done well or not done well. Major friction between Aristotle and Plato here. So as a compromise, Aristotle suggests giving the multitude, the majority, the power to deliberate and judge. As we said, choosing leaders, holding them accountable, but while leaving specialized execution to those qualified, to experts. So participation without full control. You still participate, but you don't control everything. So he says that should be applied to every free citizen. So this is basically an early blueprint for mixed government, mixed governance, and checks and balances. So I believe most modern systems actually follow Aristotle's advice here in practice today. Public elects the oversees the leaders, but doesn't directly necessarily run day-to-day governance. They don't participate in every single thing, like how to organize schools, how to organize kindergartens, how to write down tax policies. People, not everyone every day just goes and participates in these things. They leave it to the experts. But here is also another argument that comes from Aristotle, is that laws should have the highest authority, rule of law, because they're impersonal and apply equally. Rulers, in best case scenario, act only when the law cannot address the specifics. So law is general, but then when it comes to specifics, then the experts step in. Those who understand governance step in, and then they make decisions. But here's another paradox. Aristotle says but that does not solve the problem. Like we haven't answered the question of what kind of laws should the society have. Aristotle says the most authoritative element in a city is its government, the one that has the most amount of respect, most amount of authority. So then its purpose must be the highest political purpose, to rule for the benefit of the whole community, not for any one part. This is again a continuation of the topic that we discussed in the previous episode, where Aristotle argued that the purpose of the city is the common advantage. of the city, where he was criticizing that democracies and oligarchies, that they focus on only specific parts, the benefit of the poor people or the benefit of the rich people. But he says the purpose of the city governance is the benefit of the whole, the city itself, not just one part of it. And this is again, if you have read Aristotle before or if you watched my previous episodes, this will come similar to you when we talk about purpose all the time. This is Aristotle's teleological approach. And telos of governance is justice or the common advantage. Some will say that the offices should be unequally distributed on the basis of something that makes someone in particular different than others. But it would be absurd, Aristotle says, to make this distinction based on height or other physical characteristics that has nothing to do with the governance. And he gives an example from flute player. Flute player won't play flute better or worse just because he or she is shorter or taller. What matters is if they can play it or not, play it well or not. Imagine someone who's very good at flute playing, but they are very short, maybe not very good looking. Even though in general, Aristotle says those two things are more prominent in general sense. But when it comes to specifically playing the flute playing should be given to that person. Yes, overall it is desirable for all individuals desire this, like being good looking person, being taller. But that doesn't apply to specific scenarios where the expertise is needed. So not all differences between people are relevant to arts. And we can include ruling, governance to that art as well. So Aristotle says that the right to hold office should only depend on qualities that actually contribute to the purpose of that art. In this case, city. What's the purpose of the city? Common advantage of the city. Only relevant inequalities in political life are those that actually contribute to ruling well, like virtue and political wisdom. So those are the relevant inequalities, not the inequalities that depend on your physical traits, your background, gender, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. Like if you think about the modern life, modern world, people voting for actors, influencers, or sports stars because they are famous or attractive rather than because they have relevant skill set. So Aristotle would see this as an irrelevant inequality being treated as relevant, like people getting confused, or assigning offices based on symbolic traits like beauty, ethnicity, gender, etc., without regard for actual competence, or CEOs appointing relatives or friends to higher offices where their unrelated skills like personal connections are treated as qualification. But in summary, this is a test of Aristotle, Aristotle's flute player test. If the point is to make good music, give the flute to the best musician, not the tallest, the prettiest, or the most famous. If you watch the previous episode, we touched upon the topic of different 6 types of regimes that Aristotle defines based on 2 variables, the purpose of the governance and the number of people participating in governance. And we also touched upon the topic of why Aristotle considers the radical democracies and oligarchies as unjust forms of regime. Because there he says in democracies, rulers rule for the benefit of the majority. But in oligarchies, rulers rule for the benefit of the few. In both cases, the ruling is done in the name of benefiting some group, not the city as a whole. Aristotle would say that democrats of his time justify equality in all respects, but the oligarchs do the opposite. They justify inequality in all respects. But Aristotle says that equality in one respect doesn't justify equality in all respects. Same with inequality. Inequality in one respect doesn't justify inequality in everything else. But that's what ancient democracies and oligarchies used to argue. In the case of democracies, they would say, okay, since we are all equal free citizens, that should mean that we should all have the same amount of wealth, same amount of respect, same amount of decision making and everything. Equality in everything. But in oligarchies, it's the opposite. They would say, okay, since few people are unequal in a sense that they own property, wealth, that should mean they there should be inequality in everything else. Voting, participation, and everything should be reserved for these people. Aristotle says that both are wrong because they just consider their own class interests as justice. They mistake it for justice. But the real justice in city, in governance, is the benefit of the whole community. So the wealthy people and the poor people run a risk of masking their own interests under the name of justice. And imagine then you give the ruling to these groups of people. They won't necessarily care about the justice, the virtue of the political community as a whole, but their own interests. Okay, so if everyone, the wealthy, poor, smarter, less smarter, more beautiful, less beautiful, all people are to exist in the cities, then who should rule? Here's a reminder. According to Aristotle, citizen in common sense is someone who takes part in ruling and being ruled. Then citizen in the best possible regime is someone who voluntarily chooses to take part in ruling and being ruled in view to the life in accordance with virtue. And then here's a thought experiment by Aristotle where it gets very interesting. Let's imagine there is one very virtuous and exceptional individual in society. They are above everything. They are above the law. They themselves are the law. But the law deals with people who are similar in family and capacity and everything else. So what might happen in democracies, according to Aristotle, is that since they prioritize equality before the law, then they might vanish some individuals on the basis of their wealth or other prominence. So he's saying that such incidents, when they oppress very smart, very wealthy people, doesn't necessarily happen only in tyrannies or oligarchies, but can also happen in democracies. And he gives an example. Actually, at some point in history, it was sometimes common experience in ancient Athens. There had been cases where they exiled someone just because that person was smartest, and maybe wealthy, because people just didn't like that person. So he points to those extreme scenarios where majority of the people, when given power, can act as a tyrant. Interesting question is that does this imply that such exceptional individuals will always have hard time in democracies? That majority of the people feel too insecure about such great individuals. The exceptionally virtuous person, they can be seen as a threat and dangerous by all types of regimes, not just tyrannies. That's the main point here. And I think there is a very strong parallel with the philosophy of Nietzsche. Nietzsche's idea of Übermensch, master versus slave morality. Others feeling insecure when they see someone greater than themselves and trying to downplay their greatness. You could even say that they even take revenge on such individuals by saying that they are just ordinary people and anyone can achieve what they achieved, and anyone can do what they can. And I think some very wealthy people also adapt to that in today's society when they act like very ordinary people, they talk like very ordinary people. Aristotle would say that they are doing it so that the others do not get anxious when they see greatness. What remains to be done then? According to Aristotle, it is obvious from theoretical perspective that people that have superior virtues should not be cast out of society. If someone is smart, if someone is making a lot of money because they have a very good business idea, it doesn't make sense for city's justice, for the common advantage of the city, to expel these people. But another problem is that it is difficult to rule over these exceptional individuals, and also unfair to treat them as if they are just any other citizen, like trying to rule Zeus. Aristotle gives an example. So in this case, he makes a very bold claim, and that is actually the reason why, at least in theory, Aristotle considers monarchy the best possible regime. Is that he says, what remains to be done is that people should naturally obey these people as natural kings in their cities. Okay, Aristotle hints at a political paradox. If you keep such a person inside the city, and treat them as ordinary, you are committing injustice against them. If you push them out, you risk losing the best possible leader your city could have. So Aristotle's natural king is not a hereditary monarchy by accident or by birth or by family connections. It is the person whose virtue is so exceptional that they cannot be measured by the same laws as ordinary citizens. Ruling them would be like ruling Zeus, absurd and unjust. Virtue here would outweigh the law. So that's why, at least in theory, Aristotle considers monarchy, the natural kingship he calls it, the best possible regime. Natural king ruling over willing people and everything running efficiently. So it makes sense to let them rule these exceptional individuals. Here it's very similar to Plato's idea of philosopher king. And we don't know, maybe that was the influence of Plato that led Aristotle to come into such conclusion. Because Plato was Aristotle's tutor, and Aristotle was a tutor of very famous conqueror called Alexander the Great. Democracies often resist giving such exceptional individuals sustained authority because of the norms of equality that is more respected in the ancient democracies, sometimes to their own detriment. What's the flip side here? It is easy to misidentify someone as exceptional when they're just charismatic, when they know how to play public, how to mask their real intentions. In communities, in workplaces, the tallest puppy, the most capable or virtuous person, sometimes gets cut down because of jealousy, insecurity, or fear of imbalance by the others. Modern meritocracy claims to reward exceptional talent, but sometimes struggles when a truly outstanding individual breaks the curve. So, what should be done with these individuals? Systems aren't designed to accommodate those far beyond average. Aristotle would say that systems must bend for them, not force them into ordinary molds, ordinary rules for every other citizen. He would say that treating an extraordinary person as ordinary is as unjust as treating an ordinary person as extraordinary. And his warning is that democracies can exile their best citizens without even realizing it. The exceptional people, the most virtuous people, Superman, if you use Nietzsche's term here, are a political problem. You can't rule them and you can't afford to lose them. So what does this mean from Aristotle's point of view? The monarch must be the one supremely virtuous individual whose excellence is so far above everyone else that ruling them would be unjust. They should naturally rule, like a living law. City exists for living well. If one person has the greatest capacity to guide the city toward virtue and the common good, it is logical to let them rule. In theory, one perfectly virtuous mind can provide more consistent, wise, and moral governance than the compromises and conflicts of assemblies or councils. Just as skilled captain steers the ship, the supremely virtuous person naturally leads. Everyone else benefits from their guidance. A city with a true natural king would be foolish not to follow, but also foolish to think that such people come along often. Okay, so Aristotle gave us a thought experiment. What if one person was so virtuous that they were basically Zeus among mortals? Next, he's saying, okay, all right, let's see what happens if we actually put that guy on the throne. Aristotle turns to kingship, monarchy, as one of the correct regimes, asking, is there just one type of kingship or several? He finds there are many. First, he talks about Spartan generalship, based on law, limited in power, primarily military. Kings either inherit their role or are elected. Barbarian monarchy, hereditary and lawful, but resemble tyrannies, according to Aristotle. Aristotle claims that non Greeks more readily submit to mastery. Of course, we cannot really judge Aristotle based on today's norms, today's ethics. We can't really say that Aristotle was a bad guy just because he favored his own pop nation, his own ethnicity than the others, because we're talking about the philosopher more than 2000 years ago. Hereditary kingship. Citizens protect the just king willingly. So he makes an interesting distinction between tyranny and kingship, tyranny and monarchy. If you recall from the previous episode, Aristotle said that one is just because they rule for the benefit of the community, that the other is unjust because it rules for the benefit of the one person. So citizens protect the just king willingly. In tyrants, on the other hand, need foreign guards to control citizens. Voluntary acceptance of a monarch is a key mark of monarchy, just monarchy, natural kingship. Though Aristotle here doesn't fully resolve the problem that people can willingly choose bad rulers. But in summary, he makes a first distinction between tyrannies and natural kingships. He says something interesting, that citizens protect their just king with open arms, while tyrants usually require foreign element to keep people oppressed. So in kingships, bodyguards are provided by citizens, but in tyrannies, bodyguards are directed against citizens. Seems like he's saying that if people want one man rule willingly, then this is considered monarchy rather than tyranny. But does that really solve the problem? I would ask Aristotle if he was alive today. People can want wrong leaders, or people might mistake charisma for competency. You can have one man rule by love or by fear. Aristotle taught only the first could be called kingship. Aristotle links the natural kingship to his earlier idea of the one supremely virtuous man ruling willingly, accepted by all, similar to patriarch over a household. In his ideal, the natural king rules because he is vastly superior in virtue to everyone else, so much so that no one could reasonably be considered his equal. Natural kingship is considered lawful, hereditary, and accepted willingly by citizens, making it the opposite of tyranny. Just kingship also resembles household management, where manager of the household have authority over all matters in household. Then the natural king having authority over all matters in the city. So he makes a parallel here. Natural kingship, he describes, is essentially the political realization of the supremely virtuous man idea, lawful, hereditary, and accepted by the people, ruling for the common good. So this is very interesting idea. This is going to be very relevant with AI development in the future, I believe. With discussions of superintelligence, AI emerging in some time in the future, is it fair to say that one very objective intelligent system should be given an authority over our lives because they know everything, because they're impartial, because they're objective? That's going to be a very relevant question to be asked if there is going to be very rapid development of superintelligence as predicted by some people. So, and also this episode may seem to point out that Aristotle was strongly in favor of one man ruling. But important to remember that he states this in theoretical form. And as we shall see in the next episodes, he will question the feasibility of this in practice, human nature and everything else that matters in this topic. He will test his own proposition and ultimately actually will conclude that polity is the most practical alternative in practice for most societies. So to wrap up, in these chapters, Aristotle is wrestling with who should rule and why. He gives us one of the earliest arguments for a mixed system, letting the many deliberate and judge, but reserving the execution for the qualified. He warns against both mob rule and oligarchic control, and introduces the idea of a natural king, a ruler so virtuous that the laws should bend to him or her rather than the other way around. This raises an interesting modern question. If such a person or even a superintelligent AI existed today, would we accept their rule? or would we fear it, even if it promised a better outcome, better future? In the next episodes, we'll see Aristotle takes this further, looking at kingship in more detail and also more critical format. If you found this useful, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the many are wiser than the few? Or is there something to Aristotle's vision of one supremely virtuous ruler? And can this work in practice? I hope you enjoyed this part. Have a good day and see you in the next ones. Bye.